Morning, everyone. This is our fifth and final day of the webinar series on safeguarding and protection. We're very excited today about sharing with you information around multiple different aspects of security of the people that we work with. So what we're going to be talking about today is around the POPI Act, around data security, and around the safeguarding of communication and photos and videos. When we started this project, what became quite clear is that safeguarding is about preventing and responding to abuse, harm, and misconduct in many different areas. And this doesn't just speak to the staff at our organizations, it also speaks to the people that we work with, to our constituents, to our communities, and to the people who are accessing our services. So what we wanted to get from today is to have a discussion with people who are working in the field of safeguarding, although they may not call it that, around how they've dealt with complexities in data security, in areas of photography, and how they've really dealt with some challenges around the POPI Act. When we consider preventing and responding to harm, one of the things that's come up is that we are looking not just at complying, but we're looking at power relations between people. And when we consider the POPI Act, we need to also think about what is it that we are trying to gain, and what is it that we are looking at gaining for the people that we work with. And largely what it comes down to is to go beyond compliance and really think about and to consider the human element. What is the human dignity behind the work that we do? In all of the work that we've done over the course of this week, issues of compliance around POPI, around policies and procedures have really been a huge focus. And so what we would like to speak about today is around that, and around how different organizations have dealt with these challenges. Our speakers today are going to introduce themselves. We've got Nomhle and we've got Justin. Unfortunately, Craig is not with us, so we're hoping that he joins shortly. And when he does, we'll ask him to introduce himself. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask Nomhle to introduce herself.
All right, hi everyone. Apologies if my voice is not coming along with the video. I'm just having a bit of technical issues. So yes, like Dominique said, my name is Nomhle Mlati. I'm a compliance coordinator at Barron. I've been working with compliance and quality assurance for the last 10 years in different industries. And my presentation basically will be touching base on the POPI Act and how it relates to workplace and processing that information and safeguarding that information.
Thank you, Nomhle. Justin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Cool. So I am Justin Woodburn. I work for Afrika Tikkun. I'm the digital lead of the organization. I'm also the head of, or the lead of, videography and photography. So I protect the organization's digital assets, but also their safeguarding assets when it comes to the elements of capturing our young people, you know, from all ages. 18 and above, there are other rules that we'll get into, but that is my role, to make sure that our young people are protected from a photograph and videograph element.
Fantastic. Thank you, Justin. So Nomhle, I'm going to ask you to speak first, and followed by Justin. For those who have joined the webinar, we are going to hold questions off until after the presentations, and then we will ask questions. please feel free to use the chat for any questions that you have. Thank you.
Okay, can I share my screen quickly? Okay, I'm not sure if my screen is appearing yet.
It's not yet.
Okay.
I assume that connection problems are making it a little bit slow.
Slow, yeah.
I'm going to just turn off my camera just in case that's also
Okay.
a problem. Okay, we've got it.
You got it. All right.
Yes.
So let me begin. All right, so I'll try not to be too long-winded. It's a lot of stuff. So basically, I'll give you the overview with regards to the POPI Act or Papaya. So it basically stands for the Protection of Personal Information Act 4 of 2013. So on the 22nd of June 2020, the president announced that the following provisions for the Papaya will come into effect on the 1st of July 2020. So relating to the following sections 2 to 38, 55 to 109, section 111, 114, 2 and 3. So this basically means that the public and private bodies were given up to 1 year, which was the 1st of July this year, 2021, to comply. So to section 14 of the Constitution provides that everyone has the right to privacy, which includes a right to protection against the unlawful collection, retention, and dissemination and use of personal information. So Papaya aims to promote the protection of personal information processed by public and private bodies, introduce certain conditions to establish minimum requirements for processing of personal information, provide for the establishment of an information regulator, provide for the issuing of codes of conduct, provide for the rights of persons regarding unsolicited electronic communications and automated decision-making, which you're all familiar with, and regulate the flow of personal information across South Africa, the borders of South Africa. So now let's understand who Papaya applies to. So Papaya defines the following parties, which can be natural or juristic persons. So in this context, because like I said, I'll be referring to people in the workplace. So the data subject being the employees of Barron. So this is the person to whom the personal information relates to. So myself as the employee, the responsible party, which is a public or private body or any other person, which alone or in conjunction with others determines the purpose of and means for the processing of personal information, which would then be the company, and the operator, which is the person who processes the personal information for the responsible party in terms of a contract or mandate without coming under the direct authority of that party, which is now the HR department. So the rights of the data subjects being myself, the employee, I have the right to personal information being processed in accordance with the conditions for the lawful processing of personal information, which includes being notified how my information is being collected and how it's being accessed or acquired by an unauthorized person, to have access to personal information that is held or used by the responsible party, to have any incorrect or obsolete information corrected or destroyed, and to object to any unauthorized use or processing of personal information. So what is considered personal information? So when we apply for jobs, obviously we are requested to fill in forms that have particular information. So in terms of Papaya, this is what is considered in the list here as personal information. So for reasons for BEE and other stats, we will need to fill in our race and gender, if we're pregnant or not, our marital status, national, ethnic, or social origin, language, information relating to education, medical, financial, criminal, or employment history, our ID numbers, our well-being, physical or mental health, if we have a disability, our email addresses, physical addresses, our location, and biometric information. And if you notice, usually when you do apply for jobs, they do, some recruitment agencies request you to fill in an indemnity form where they can do sort of background checks for you, depending on what industry you are in. And this is forming part of consent. So what types of processing are covered or exempted? So the processing of personal information is widely defined under POPI to include the collection, recording, organizing, collating, distributing, modifying, or storing and using, and then ultimately the destruction of that information. So POPI will apply not only to the responsible parties that are in South Africa, but also any parties that are outside of South Africa that process personal information in South Africa. Right. So, however, POPI does not apply to the processing of personal information, which is purely personal or household activities, de-identified information, which is information that can no longer be linked to an identified natural or juristic person. So this is obviously somebody who's deceased, by or on behalf of a public body where it involves national security or where its purpose is to prevent or detect unlawful activities. So like I said, obviously we all have a right to privacy, but should something trigger, let's say, a personal investigation or a criminal investigation, you basically give up, the right to decline consent to say that somebody cannot go and investigate your personal information. By the cabinet and its committees or executive council of a province relating to courts or judicial functions, or which is solely for the purpose of journalistic literacy or artistic expression. So this would relate to obviously freedom of expression that has to outweigh the right to privacy. So I'm not sure how many people are aware, but when somebody has not been charged yet with a crime, but has been arrested, legally, they're not allowed, a journalist cannot reveal the person's name until the person has been charged. So once the person has been charged, which is now obviously a criminal act, that becomes more of a freedom of expression, and it becomes a journalistic right for that person to publish the person's name or any other details relating to that crime. This is a whole lot. I will not be reading all of this, but just to touch base on the 8 conditions for lawful processing. So data subject participation, which is section 23 to 25. So this is right to request access to information in terms of the PAIA. This request can be refused. It's the right to request correction, destruction, or deletion of information. So myself being the data subject, I can request to these things. Accountability. So as I'm referring to the workplace, we have to, as part of the updated Papaya Act, we have to elect an information officer within the business. So I said that I'm the compliance coordinator for the business, which means that I'm required to ensure that things are in place, meaning how we process the information. There needs to be policies and procedures. But ultimately, should we get audited externally, by, say, the Department of Labor, they would need to go and speak to the elected information officer, which is, for us, the chief information officer who runs the IT department. So that person must have knowledge of the personal information that is being processed by the organization. And the reason why that person is not me is because I do not have access to the servers. I would not have access to, obviously, all the information and underlyings of how we safeguard the information from a technology basis, and how the information is stored, the purpose for which the information is stored, and the users of the information. So the information officer should be empowered to enforce compliance. The processing limitation. So personal information must be processed lawfully and in a reasonable manner that doesn't infringe on privacy. Processing must be adequate, relevant, and not excessive in relation to the purpose. So obviously you cannot be, if you remember from the previous slide, you cannot be asking questions that do not assist in the nature of which you are asking them for. So you cannot ask for my personal health records if it does not directly relate to my job. So if I'm not, for example, a forklift driver and I don't need to have a medical checkup before I qualify for the job, or I don't need to be working, I work at heights and I don't need, you know, to go through sort of a medical assessment to find out if I qualify for that job, then you cannot ask me questions related to that. It has to be job specific and it has to be for a purpose, you know, that will serve the company. So then the purpose specification. So like I said, collection must be for a specific, explicit, defined, and lawful purpose and related to a function or activity of the responsible party. Retention should not be longer than is necessary in relation to the purpose. Deletion after expiry of the retention period. Destruction and deletion should be as soon as reasonably practicable. So as a company, we are required legally to keep information for employees for 5 years after they've been terminated. And this is for obviously a myriad of reasons, but also obviously legally where, you know, if somebody, let's say, has passed on and the family still has sort of a policy with the business, the beneficiaries can come back here and, you know, claim what needs to be claimed. Also legally, in terms of if there's injury, we legally need to keep those documents here, you know, as proof to say that we followed process. Then further processing limitations, it's not necessary to consider if consent, public record or data subject is made it public, historical, statistical, or for research purposes to prevent threat to public health or safety. So this is obviously in terms of any criminal act. Like I said before, once you have breached that, because obviously you've breached now the policies of a company, you no longer can say, no, you cannot now go and investigate me. I'll give you an example that happened within the business. Obviously, we all signed consent, you know, with regards to information being processed. But once an employee became sort of a suspect in a criminal matter, they were allowed to send investigators to the employee's home, you know, to look for the stock that was supposedly at the employee's home. So it just depends, obviously, on what we are talking about, but it is within the company's rights in order to, you know, it's no longer breaching POPI. Information quality, the information must be complete and accurate and not misleading and up to date. So it is the responsibility of the Human Resources Department to ensure that NOMFLE's, you know, employee file is up to date. So like I said, where companies give employees funeral policies, or we have provident funds where you have to nominate beneficiaries. Anybody is allowed to change their mind. I mean, I might want to put my sister as a beneficiary, then we argue in 3 years, and then I want to remove her as a beneficiary. So it is, the onus is on the HR department and obviously the employee to update that information properly, so that if said beneficiary is deceased, you can now add another beneficiary to whatever policy it is that you have with the company. And therefore, with Barron, we try once every year to send out, you know, updates to the employees to say, please ensure that everything that you've given HR is up to date. And if you'd like to make any changes, that they should come and update the changes accordingly. Then openness. This is the responsible party must take steps to make the data subject, so the responsible party now being Barron and the HR department, to make the data subject, myself, aware of what personal information is collected, sourced, and responsible parties' details, with the purposes and whether the supply of personal information is voluntary or mandatory. And consequence for failure to supply, law authorizing or requiring the collection intended for cross-border transfer. So how we basically managed to comply with Papaya, we had to send out consent forms to 400 employees within the business, which was you know, a very exhausting task. We, I would say, fumbled a little bit because we sort of gave too much consent, and then I'll explain how. So instead of maybe say a one-pager, because we currently have the information with us. So obviously, as an employee, and I started here last year, the HR department already has my banking details. They have my ID, my driver's license, and whatever else that they requested from me. And this was merely just, you know, just to comply, to say NOMFLE has given consent to Barron to keep the information, to process it, you know, for business purposes. So we had to do that times 400. But we broke it down so much that some employees declined to give HR access to IDs and access to bank accounts and access to next of kin, which obviously now in terms of processing, for necessity, as I've said, becomes difficult, because you cannot say now, once I have your ID, now you're declining for me to keep your ID. There are things that need to be in place in order for you to qualify as an employee for an organization. And legally, we need to have your ID, we need to have your banking details so that you can get paid. So we realized that, we made it too open-ended and we need to sort of compress that. And then security safeguards. This is the obligation to implement organizational and technical measures for loss of and damage to or unauthorized destruction of personal information and unlawful access or processing of personal information. So if there's a data breach that could relate to confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So Barron basically supplies other businesses. So we have a lot of information for a lot of customers, and we need to ensure that our systems cannot be breached. And if they are, that we get alerted. Because we are aware that people can send emails to our customers and clients saying that we've changed our banking details, or steal their information, their personal information as well, to do unlawful things. So it's very important that we have structures and frameworks in place that would minimize the risk of that. So processing of special information. So in terms of Section 26, a responsible party, being the company, may not process personal information concerning religious or philosophical beliefs, race or ethnic origin, trade union membership, political persuasion, your health, sex life, biometric information, and criminal behavior relating to the alleged commission of any offense or any proceedings in respect of any offense allegedly committed, or the disposal of such proceedings related to a data subject, unless the requirements of Section 27 are met or the information regulator has provided authorization. So obviously this is dependent on where you're working and what type of job you're doing. So we know that people in like the finance sector have to have background checks. Those things need to be revealed. Obviously you don't want to hire somebody, who has a criminal record in fraud. So that's relating to that Section 27. And with regards to health, obviously somebody can't ask about your HIV status, your diabetic status and things like that. But with regards to COVID-19, your organization can request that obviously you do tell them if you are positive at the time you do test positive. And that's because as much as it is your own private information, it does infringe on other people's health. Because we know that COVID-19 is highly contagious and can be detrimental to people, obviously, who are immunocompromised. So the safeguarding of information. So basically, this is where we create the framework of how we create the policies and procedures pertaining to how information is processed and how it is then ultimately destroyed. So we must ensure as an organization that we have integrity and confidentiality of the personal information. So meaning that not anybody can just access it. So like for the company that I'm in right now, there's a server, and I think only 5 people have access to that server that work in the HR department and the chief information officer, because they are the only ones that need access to that, which is all the employee files and that information there. But me as the compliance coordinator, I do not have access to that because I do not require access to that. So all reasonable internal and external risks to personal information has been identified. We need to establish and maintain an appropriate safeguard against the risk identified, regularly verify that the safeguards are effectively implemented. So we need to test that our systems, that we cannot get hacked. An operator should only process personal information with the knowledge and authorization of the responsible party. You need to treat the personal information, confidential, and immediately notify the responsible party if there's subject's information that was maybe taken unlawfully. So if somebody gets hacked, if one of our servers gets hacked, because like I said, we have a lot of customers information, and they start getting spam emails to say, we've changed our banking details, we need to know that that's happened in order to notify them to say, no, that is not true. Or if they've been given some false information regarding advertising, we need to be able to get ahead of that. Direct marketing. So I've included this here because we have a lot of direct marketing. Like I said, we have a lot of customers, and we are tired of spam. So Papaya is actually here to help us. For those people who have Truecaller, we all know when we can see our phones flashing red, and somebody says spam, or annoying, because you can save the name in different ways, where it's either an automated voice person who's trying to sell you something to press 1 and do whatever, or you get a lot of spam emails, and you're trying to find where it says unsubscribe. So this section here discusses direct marketing by means of unsolicited electronic communications, where now companies are, lawfully supposed to have those things in place. So they should have click here to unsubscribe to this mailing list. You need to have somewhere where you can tick, even if you were browsing and you wanted to inquire, because sometimes you need to fill in a form. You need to, have an area where it says, I agree to receive marketing correspondence regarding this. Even when you're applying for a job, there are some companies where they want to advertise or send you similar job posts. You need to be able to have the option to do that, where they don't just start spamming you. Or there's a notification that says you've received this email from Kevra or Baron because you've subscribed to the newsletter. So that's a notification. So then if you receive that and you haven't subscribed, there should be somewhere where you can unsubscribe. Sometimes you'll have notices that say intended for opt-in only. If you feel that this email is unsolicited, please report it to us. Or if you're done with us as a business, you should be able to unsubscribe to all of our emails. So basically, Papaya is there to protect us from that. And it should have been there actually to protect us from companies passing on our numbers to other companies, where you get, offered insurance and cell phones on a daily basis, even though you haven't looked for a phone in over 2 years.
Nomtle, 2 minutes left.
All right, almost done. So data sharing, retention, and data destruction. So like I said, as a business, you need to ensure that there is a way in which you can maintain your data, and especially how you destroy it. So like I said, I'm talking about servers, that once something has been deleted from the system, you need to ensure that there's no recycle bin where somebody can come back and find it. If you, like us, decide to shred whatever documents are there, you need to ensure that the people that you select to shred are people that are only allowed to look at the server as well, because you don't want information, getting into the wrong hands. And once information is shredded, you need to make sure that it cannot be reconstructed again. So you can use a waste company where they can take it off site and basically turn it into pulp and ensure that, that cannot be reconstructed. So I think that is the end of my presentation. Thank you guys for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I think that was very informative and speaks quite a lot to various questions that people may have around not just information within their organizations, but also with clients. I think that there is, this does lead to questions around how do people hold security within their companies. But I think that one of the things that people have spoken to us about, and maybe it's just something to think about for the end, is around making sure that our beneficiaries, or I don't really like that word, but the people who we work with, our clients' information is processed and kept safe. So potentially we'll speak about that at the end. In the meantime, I'm going to introduce Justin, who's going to speak about security and how Afrika Tikkun has held the security of people within their videography and photography. So over to you, Justin.
Cool, thanks very much, Dom. Morning to everyone. So I'm going to share my screen shortly, just to give everyone an understanding. So POPI aligns very much with what we do in our processes, especially for our young people. It's a very, how do you say, a thing that I take with a lot of pride, to make sure that from any step within the organization, the photographs, especially for the children that are under the ages of 18 that have parental consent, the only person that can give approval for images to be shared would be myself or my executive or a CEO. No other imagery content is allowed to be shared. And we have protocols, which I will show you guys, that are put in place to stop that. And if something is leaked, we have protocols to immediately be triggered so that it is turned off, switched off, or resolved. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay, just let me know if you guys can see it.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, cool. So just a brief understanding. So I'll just read it out to you guys. The use of images of children and young people have become a matter of particular concern in recent years. There's suggestions that such images may be used inappropriately or in order to gain access to the children and or young people pictured. The issue has been further complicated with the advancements of internet technology, meaning images and information are much easier to access and obtain. So let's just quickly talk around about that. So obviously with the internet and the social, boom in the last 10 years, companies like ourselves, especially within the NGO sector, we really had to ramp up our security and our procedures to make sure that any of our content that we store, one, is protected, that we share has permission, and two, that the people that we take the images of are aware. So we'll go further into that down here. So I just want to skip all of this because it's actually not relevant. So everybody takes pictures. So this is also a protocol that we've had to follow at our centers. So the cell phone cameras, most cameras today can take really great photos. For many, it is more difficult to control the taking of photos, and any code of conduct for groups of children needs to include the wise and respectful use of photographs. So the three things: always ask permission. If a photo might in any way hurt anyone or put them at risk, delete it. All pictures used formally and publicly should have formal consent granted. So let's just go into the organizational structure. So at every one of our centers, and if it was in our, we have many core programs, but it was in our 360 supports, our centers, and even some of our external partners that we are now starting to break out with or partner with. We have what they call marketing coordinators or marketing champions at each center. So they are all well trained in knowing that, for example, if a donor, if a representative from government, people that often come to the centers to have a tour to see the impact that we are creating, they are immediately informed that they cannot take photos. If they pull out their phone, we kind of say it like when you're in meetings, put your phone off, turn it off, put it in your pocket. If they take out the phone, the MC, or we normally also have a 360 support staff that's also present within those tours, they will immediately actually be asked to leave the premises or to hand over the phone. We often also take the phones from our guests at our reception areas at our centers. This is just to ensure that no content was, because sometimes our MCs might not see if someone's trying to sneak a quick photo. So all of them are very well trained in terms of that. The MCs, the marketing coordinators, are the only people that will take the photographs within the tour. Once they have taken the photographs, it could be someone from government or one of our donors, like an APSA or an Investec. If those donors would like the pictures to be shared with them, all children, when they come to our center, and parents under age 18 sign a consent form the day they register, and every year they come back, they sign a register giving consent, that knowing that some of their images, or they could be in photographs, that will be shared on social, and it is always to publicly profile them. So no humiliation, is to publicly share their story. So that is the first step. Then now with the MCs and that, if an external party would like access to those, they will take the photographs, they will share it with me, and then they will state to me, Justin, for example, ABSA came and did a tour today at our Utando branch. They really loved what we're doing right now in our ECD, which is our early childhood development core programs. Can we share a few images with them? I will then look through the images to make sure that all the images, one, are appropriate. Because remember, we do not want to by accidentally show a kid in a swim costume if they were swimming hypothetically, or if they were not dressed appropriately. I will then look through the images, I will vet them, and if I am happy with them, then I'll give it to one of my executives. My executive will then vet it, and we will only share those specific images. But before we share that, we also get then the client to sign a consent form to say, where are they using these images, for how long, and what is the purpose, and also to always hypothetically tag Afrika Tikkun within sharing from a PR perspective, social perspective, so that we can make sure that if they say we are just using it for a acknowledgement post, we will then also give them a time frame that once that's, let's say it's a week, they need to remove that image, and I will follow up with their IT and dev department that that image has been completely deleted off of their servers. So that's the first primary step in terms of just protecting our kids. Within the centers, we also have what we call safeguarding champions, which is normally within the 360 support program. So you remember, we have teachers, we have students that have photographs or phones that can take photographs and they can share it on the internet. A lot of the kids, when they go to events, they take photographs and, you know, for example, they're like, I'm at River Sands today for spelling bee. We also have myself and my team from the social team. We monitor that and see that if any photos were taken where maybe a child was dressed inappropriately, the image didn't like look correctly, it was discriminating or something, we have access to delete all that content. Even from their personal basis, we can delete it. From a staff perspective, they are also informed that they cannot take photos of the children at the center, you know, like no buddy stuff. That is not allowed. If they do take it, there will be, that is when then HR would step in. There will be disciplinary action. It's not even a warning. That is one of our highest things. If you take a photo of a child under the age of 18 who has not given you consent, it becomes an immediate disciplinary action. So yeah, that's the first step. So let's just go a little bit further down. So the child protection issue should always be at the forefront of any decision to publicize an image of a child. Nonetheless, there has also been increasing a reflection in recent years on the ethnical challenges posed by the use of images of children by NGOs. So this is where we are at the forefront of making sure that this is correct. For example, while pictures of, so this is an example of other NGOs, if you guys think of World Food Organizations and that, you know, an image of a starving, you know, child have been frequently, so we often see those images, especially like from a first world country, they see these images of, you know, kids with their hands out starving, all of that kind of stuff, to help raise funds for international NGOs. Questions have been raised about whether such images paint a fair and balanced picture of the life in other countries and whether they help promote the rights of children in the long run. Because obviously that child is, or that person is being photographed is, it's a very emotional and a very, how do you say, traumatic place that he's living in. And now that's being shared to the world. Yes, to raise funds to assist him or to assist her, but it's not, we try to make things ethnically safe on social. So with Afrika Tikkun, we don't live by the motto of starving or something like that. We live by the motto of, we thrive on the excellence of our young people. We thrive on their accomplishments. We thrive on the joy that they have at our centers. We thrive on the food that we are able to provide for them. We thrive on when they play sporting events, when they do events like spelling bee, quiz and debate, maths Olympiad. We show the positive sides of the impact that we get from our donors and from our partners to make these young people's lives better. So a lot of our images are to show the positive side of the spectrum, not the negative. And then secondly, we often, it'll show further in this document, we often show the child's story as well. We often, if the child is under 18, we give parental consent. We often get one of the center staff to also explain to the parents, because remember, sometimes not all the parents are that can speak well in English. So I would often have someone that can explain it a little bit better to them, that we might use this post on social. But we like to then share that child or that young person's story of where he is at or where she is at. We don't just post something and then write copy, you know, out of thin air. We gather information from them so that they feel a part of the journey that we are trying to grow and impact the organization as a whole. So that's another step that we just take, that any of our if the kid, most of the kids who are under age of 10 or 12 and lower, we get the parents, we mainly explain to the parents, and we get the parents to explain to the child and our 360 support staff. If they're over, we also normally just chat to them just to show them the journey. We often share the post with them so they can, you know, see it, feel positive about it, you know, not feel ashamed of their photos. So we always make sure that whatever content we share online, from websites, social media, PR articles, it is on a positive light. So I'm just going to go down a little bit further. Okay, so this is a European code, but I follow this quite well because obviously they are at the forefront of making sure that it's good findings and insights for us. So images and messages should seek to represent and complete picture of both internal and external assistance and partnership that often results between local and international NGOs. So also we don't often share the images with our donors and partners that have had an impact, but we always tag them within relevant sources of PR and social to give them also to show the public that, you know, for example, KFC or an Ad Hope has had an impact with us to maybe promote a specific event or to have a specific impact of how much food we are able to give throughout a month or 3 months or a year. So that is in terms of corporate companies, their CSI. So just a little bit down. So just some guiding principles that we also follow: respect the dignity of the people concerned, believe in the belief in the equality of all people, acceptance of the need to promote fairness, solidarity, and justice. So that's what we also always take into our security reasons, is that it's not just from a security point of view where people can access the content, it's also from the child or the young person's emotional status of, if we share this image, would they be comfortable with it? So we always make that a high priority. Sorry about that. So I'm just going to stop that. And then there is a third section as well. So those are the two primary sections. Is the one is the center staff, the MCs, the 360 support. They ensure that any external parties and internal follow the procedures of not taking imagery, are not allowed to share imagery. If imagery is to be shared, it needs to be vetted by me. It needs to be vetted by an executive. And then they need to fill in a form, a compliance form, and then also state when that image or that source of content would be removed. And then we follow up afterwards. The second one is to make sure that the people that we take the photographs of, the young people, even the guys that are over the 18, we explain very clearly to them of how it would be used, and we make it often very comfortable with them. We show the image before, we often even share, if it is at a center level, we will share with the marketing coordinators and the 360 support staff, here's the design or the social post or the PR activation we are about to do, to also just make sure that the kid or the parent who is signed on their behalf is comfortable with what is being shared. And then the final part is now obviously of the obtained information. So the obtained content so NGOs like Afrika Tikkun, who've been around for 27 years, we have a lot of collateral. Obviously in prior years, maybe certain procedures weren't lacking, but it wasn't at the same digital front. So we obviously upgraded completely across board to Microsoft 365, SharePoint, where any content that is taken from an imagery and photography basis, I'm just talking about that now, can only be shared through those platforms. I do not, for me, I do, and I vet it. I do not allow WeTransfer, Google Drive, any of that. It needs to go through SharePoint, especially in the internal organization, because that means we can keep all the collateral. So in years' time, we can reflect back, but also if someone were to try and hack, they cannot access it. Microsoft has a lot of firewalls to protect. And even if someone were to breach it, we also have methods and measures to stop that from being leaked, or stop the post or an image that has been taken out of context, to immediately rectify that within the public audience. So those are the 3 prompts that we take. It's the exact same for videography when you film someone. So that's how we vet it from our side. And we have a lot of people that keep us up to date, keep us informed of when they feel also that maybe when external parties want to come and film at a center or at an event, for example, let's just say an old mutual, and they send in a film company, they have to come through us first as well. They have to sign consent forms. They have to show us the content first. They have to show us the final product first. Anything that they film of our young people has to be vetted and approved by us before it even goes into the public eye. So that's me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Justin. For people who are interested in this, a few years ago, there was quite a lot of debate around issues of photographs and videos, particularly of people in kind of more what you would call classic vulnerable populations. So people from Africa, from South America, from Asia. And so there was the DevPix debate, and I'm going to just, one of the articles that we found quite interesting, or I found quite interesting, is on DevPix. I've just put into the Google, sorry, not the Google chat, into the chat. And it really talks about why it's important to treat the people who we are working with and taking photographs of with respect. And I think what Justin has spoken about really goes into why Tikkun deals with this in such a strong manner, and really hoping to ensure the dignity of the children that we're working with comes across well in the photos. So if you are interested, feel free to look at the link that I've shared. And yes, I'd also like to introduce our last speaker, Craig Hickson Smith. He's going to be speaking today on issues of data and data security. Craig, would you like to please introduce yourself?
Hi, good morning, everybody. And firstly, sorry for being so late. I've had some challenges this morning, and thank you to the organizers and the other speakers for flexibility and shifting things around a little bit. I greatly appreciate it. So I'm Craig Hickson Smith. I'm a research psychologist by training, and my job is as the head of evaluation and research for an international NGO called the Center for Victims of Torture. And we work in the United States and in several countries in East Africa and in the Middle East, where there are large populations of refugees who have been tortured. And as you can imagine, not only are we dealing with very sensitive, protected health information, but we're also dealing with very sensitive information about human rights, severe human rights violations. We also work a great deal with human rights defenders who are often working within authoritarian situations. And so their information is really sensitive. And a part of my job that literally keeps me awake at night sometimes is trying to make sure that the information of the roughly 4,500 clients we see every year in many different countries, plus the 200 or so human rights defenders we work with, that their information is secure, that I can give them the assurances that I need to do, that they are not going to be endangered or their privacy is not going to be violated by some error in the part of myself or my team. And so I've been on a journey of many years to try and think about how do we move organizations and teams along the pathway to becoming more and more to making information security part of our DNA, really thinking about it all the time, and really putting it at the center of how we think about this work. And for me, that's largely about understanding the people at the heart of security work and information security work at the moment. So I'm going to start sharing my presentation now. 1 minute. Okay, you should be seeing something with a large orange banner across the top.
Yes, got it.
Right. Okay, so get on the right screen. I tend to come to this work from what has started to be called holistic security. And holistic security comes from a critique of the way security is usually taught, in that it's very siloed and it's very tools forward, it's very policy forward, but it loses track of the people. And holistic security tries to sort of put the people back in the way we teach security and the way we do security. So I think about it in terms of 3 sort of champions. We have the sort of physical security dimension, we have the human well-being dimension, and we have the digital dimension. And please excuse the stereotypes. They're meant to be amusing. But it means that when we think about a human being in a security situation, we have to look at how they're doing in terms of their own health and emotional health. What is their digital profile and what is their physical profile? And these things interlock in really obvious and less obvious ways. I mean, one of the cartoons that I remember seeing is, a cartoon which is really awful, especially from someone in the torture, but all you need is a baseball bat to break the most sophisticated encryption technology in the world, because you can force it out of people. So physical security is a necessary component to ensure digital security. So if you want to dig into this a little bit more, you can look at our holistic security manual. I'm just putting the link up here so you can see where to head to. And I wanted to focus in just here on the bottom right. You can see we start the conversation with individual responses to threats, inner beliefs and values around security, team and peer responses, communicating about security in teams and organizations. So it's a very human focus to the conversations we have, and I'm very happy to share this link again if anyone didn't get it. But going back to my 3 champions here, I want to tell you 2 stories, both true stories, that are about the human side of being responsible for security and being a victim of security and information security violations. So the first one is a story about me personally. I was visiting a refugee in Kempton Park on Easter Monday, and I was robbed of my brand new, very snazzy iPhone 12. And once they had taken it off me, it's just a mugging. They forced me to open the phone by force and then ran away with it. And I had to drive 45 minutes back to my home in order to get to a device so that I could shut down access to my phone. And I have to tell you, those 45 minutes were hell as I drove in traffic, thinking about all the stuff that the people who'd taken my phone had access to. So I invite you now just to think about what's on your own telephone. Think about your email correspondence, think about your contacts, think about your photographs, think about what's in various apps that you might have. And there's, for me at least, there was a really strong feeling of my privacy being violated. And while it was a violent attack, I was slightly injured. None of that has stayed with me. What has stayed with me is that for those 45 minutes, people had access to my private world and my family's world. There was correspondence with my father, who had died a few months previously. Things like that that have stayed with me for a long time after this event. The second story is about an organization I was working with that was on the receiving end of a brute force attack. So a brute force digital attack is essentially where you have many people in an organization working on a server, and they all have passwords and they all have different levels of access to different types of information and parts of the organization's set of information world. And a brute force attack is when you just try 1 million passwords until one of them works. And then you get in and you immediately have access to anything that the person whose password you cracked had access to. Now, in this case, this was an organization working on very sensitive information, and the password that got cracked happened to be Spring 2021, which is a ridiculous password. And it got cracked really easily. And the people who cracked that password had access to the servers unknown for at least a month. So they had time to sift through everything. And I've had to work through with that organization, telling everybody whose information was shared, you know, what information they had access to. The cost to the people whose information was shared is fear for their family members, fear for their children, fear for their financial situations. Massive reputational loss for the organization, as they've had to face this. A lot of bad feelings among the staff, because everyone's wondering, you know, whose password was shared and who violated, who didn't, you know, stick to the rules. And just working with an organization through the pain of having what is in fact a really common and becoming increasingly more common kind of attack. And so I just wanted to give you those two stories to really connect to the human side of what information security is really about, and talk a little bit with you about, you know, how fear works and how these feelings of betrayal and fear, distrust play out for us. And I'm just going to change this to a cross-section of a human brain. And I'm going to show you what happens is, if you're reading, this is how the image, this is how the information flows in your brain. You might be reading a page, and the information flows in through your eyes. It goes first to your thalamus. Thalamus is like the gateway into the brain. And then it goes to your cortex, where you think about it, you apply meaning, you think about how you want to respond, you plan, all your higher motor functions are engaged. And if there is something that is threatening or emotionally invoke some emotional feelings, then you'll see this pathway that goes through the amygdala and to the adrenal response, and you have an emotional response to whatever it is you're reading or what you're watching on a television, whatever it is. And all of that takes about 24 milliseconds. So, you know, in neuroscience, that's quite a long time, actually. But what happens if I take the book away and I replace it with a threat? So here's my little time bomb. What happens is the way our brain works changes. The signal goes directly from our thalamus, the gateway, to our amygdala and to our adrenal response. We do not have time for higher level processing. And what you'll see is in the top right-hand corner here, our response time has gone from 24 milliseconds to on average 12 milliseconds. So we've halved our information processing and doubled our response time. Now, this is really important because it keeps us alive. A lot of what I've done throughout my career is trauma therapy, and people tell me over and over again, I don't know how I knew that something was about to happen, but I just jumped out of the way, or I immediately started running, or I immediately started screaming. They literally say, I didn't even think about it. And that's the literal truth, because when we think about thinking, we think about our higher cortical functions. All of that is circumvented when we are frightened. And we have a range of different approaches. I'll illustrate these with some pictures. When I was a child, I was terrified of the monsters in the cupboard, like many children are. So there's the freeze response where we lie in bed, terrified that as long as we don't move, no one will see us. There's the flee response where we go running to our mother's bedroom in the middle of the night, squealing. There's the comply response where we try and make a deal with whoever is threatening us. There is the tend and befriend response where we look after people and try and protect others, and in so doing, make ourselves feel safer. There's the posture response where we pretend to be much stronger and much more aggressive than we actually are. I'm not a particularly physical kind of guy, and I remember getting into a bar fight once and puffing up my shoulders and threatening someone with my fist in the air, and there was a little voice in the back of my head going, not in the face, not in the face. And then lastly, there is the actual fight response. We can fight when we have to and do. And it's these evolutionary responses to danger that protect us. And sometimes they fail. So this is the dodo, the famous example. Dodos lived on Mauritius and had no experience of human beings. And so they were very friendly, and they never ran away from human beings, and they got eaten and beaten into distinction by sailors passing through the island because they hadn't had the chance to develop an evolutionary response to danger. This happens to human beings too. This next slide is a picture of population collapse in Mexico. The population is in millions of people, and you can see a population collapse in a period of about 100 years from 22 million to 2 million. And that's the population collapse that happened when the indigenous populations in Mexico were exposed to the diseases to which they had no natural immunity when they came into contact with other people, in large part Europeans, as part of beginnings of colonialism. So we know that our evolutionary threat responses can fail. So now when I show you these pictures that you've absolutely seen, I'm sure, if you've ever worked on a computer, do you feel anxiety? Do you feel fear? Or do you feel irritation? I imagine that the chances are you feel irritation. And very often you go, click to ignore, you know. Now, these are the danger signals, but they are disconnected from our emotional responses to danger. And so for me, this is why it's essential that I've just seen a sign come up that says participants can now see your screen. Have people not been able to see my screen for the last little while?
We have been able to see your screen, don't worry.
Oh, all right, good. Because a lot of it probably wouldn't have made sense. Okay. Yeah, so this is why we really need to bring the human story into information security all the time. We have to try and connect these digital threat indicators to our natural responses to danger. We have to start feeling a little bit frightened when we see these signs. Something is wrong, that motivates us to take action. And so if we start thinking about then, how do we move an organization to become more and more aware of information security? There's many layers to it, but let me start with some terms. Firstly, information security. Information security is nothing new. We've had to be secure about information since the days we started collecting taxes in 1300 or whatever it was. But cybersecurity is new, and cybersecurity is really the world of hackers. It's the world of people trying to access information through targeted attacks for the most part. And in the middle is this place where our information becomes vulnerable, and that's the world of digital security. But the situation we live in at the moment is that the cybersecurity threats are fast outpacing our awareness of them and our ability to respond to them. There's a kind of an arms race going on between those who wish to protect information and those who wish to access information. And those of us who are users or managers of information are often collateral damage in that arms race. And so what we really see is that cybersecurity is becoming a bigger and bigger part of information security. Very little information, relatively little information now is stored in ways that are not digital. And so digital security is becoming the dominant area of concern when we think about information security. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be making sure that your filing cabinets are locked and all those other kinds of ways we keep information as well. But what we see is that digital security is gradually taking over information security and becoming almost synonymous with information security. So as we move towards thinking about how do we move organizations, it's really essential that we have a layered approach. And so for me, it starts with awareness. It starts with a constant campaign within our organizations to build awareness of cybersecurity, cyber threats, and always linking that with human stories, making sure that the actual stories of people affected by breaches in information security are constantly at the forefront. And that's why I started with the two stories that I started with today. Out of that awareness, we need to build a culture within organizations that is responsive to questions of information security and digital security. Part of that culture means building policies. Our staff, our managers, our beneficiaries need to understand very clearly what our policies are. And as this whole field is developing, and especially over the last few years, as more and more people are working remotely, we're having to dig into what does it mean for an organization if people are accessing the organization's digital spaces on their own devices? It's one thing to manage a server, but now when that server is being accessed through people's mobile phones, through their templates, through online learning platforms, obviously through their computers that might be supplied by work, but might also be personal computers. how do we start to make sure that all those devices are in fact secure? And so what we start to see is businesses having you bring your own device policies, of having requirements around what responsibilities are on staff around how they manage their personal devices if they are using those devices for work that is connecting to the information spaces of the organization. There are many questions there about the limits of privacy and the limits of security and communication with each other. We need to provide people with the tools to be secure. Now, this is the criticism that is often leveled at digital security practice, is it starts at this level. It starts at the level of the tools. And says, if we give you the tools, then everyone will just use them and we'll all be fine. There is plenty of evidence that that fails, that giving people tools is not nearly enough. It's a necessary condition, but it's no ways a sufficient condition. Partially because the tools take time to learn, the tools slow information down, slow work down, and the more tired we get, the more stressed we get, the more our workload increases, the higher the cost of using the information security tools becomes, and people just stop using them. And so tools is an important part of the conversation, but it's only one part. And so those tools have to come with training, and training is not a 3-day workshop. Training is a 3-day workshop followed by, ongoing refresher work, support work, mentoring work. I would use the word capacity development rather than training. It's a constant process of growth. And then as the last piece, and hopefully the smallest piece, is management. There has to be some form of accountability. And so when I think about working with an organization, I'm thinking about working at all these layers of an organization, and I'm thinking about messaging. So here are some messages that I try and emphasize. The one are messages of care. Things like reminding people of the real human consequences of failures in information security, but also recognizing that this can feel overwhelming, that it can feel really difficult, that people can feel an enormous burden of responsibility, and that they can feel alone with that. So messages of care, I think, are really important as we talk about information security. Secondly, I think messages of agency are really important. So telling people repeatedly, the Donald Trump school of information sharing is if you say something often enough, people will finally believe you. So repeating to people that they are not helpless and pointing out that simple behaviors make a huge difference. So one of the stories I told is someone had a password of spring 2021, a simple behavior of learning how to use a password manager and having reasonable complex passwords. That is not such a difficult thing for someone who has a reasonable level of tech savvy. That simple behavior would have saved that organization an enormous burden of having to deal with the information breach that they had. So simple behaviors making big differences.
Craig, 1 minute left. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm right on schedule. That I think messages of support, that we're going to provide tools and training, and that there are people that you can go to for help are great. I think messages of solidarity, that we all depend on each other and that we need to trust each other. We need to recognize that it takes time and effort to learn new skills. It takes time and effort to implement new skills, but that it gets easier to do this with practice. And lastly, that there's accountability, recognizing that everybody is going to make mistakes, but that negligence is not acceptable within the team and within the organization, and that people will be held accountable. And with that, I'll say thank you for the time.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And I think that that gives us all a lot to think about in our data security, because I think that there's a feeling sometimes of being complacent, and you know that what you said about being mugged and just how much you have on your phone. I think that we all, if I think about what's on my phone and what's on my computer, it does make me feel a little bit stressed out. So it really helps to personalize it quite a lot. I'd like to remind everyone that to use the chat if you'd like to ask questions. I have a couple of questions in the meantime. So for Nomhle, there was a question on the chat, and then I've gotten a couple of questions directly. So
Okay.
on the chat, it says, on the storage servers, are we allowed to use platforms like Google Drive for clients and staff data with limited access to certain staff members, of course? So that's, I'm going to just read out the questions and then give you an opportunity to chat. And for Justin and Craig, please feel free to also add in as well. The second question is, what happens, what would you suggest if people choose not to give consent? And this can be from a staff member point of view, so given consent for things like POPI, from a staff member point of view, and then for clients or the people who we work with are the people who organizations serve. Maybe it's two separate people, groups of people. And then if the organization in their in their request for data consent, is there a process, or what happens if the organization does not indicate how the data will be used, shared, or destroyed? So are they obligated to give all of that information, or are they can they omit part of that and still request and assume that consent should be given? So those are the questions for you. I'm going to pause there and then continue with questions.
Okay. So with the first one, with regards to the Google Drive, I think maybe Craig would be the better person there regarding that. And then I'll jump in for the second and third question. Yeah.
Okay, I'll jump on that one. So in every organization, you need to make choices that look at the level of security you need against the sensitivity of the information that you need to protect. Google Drive itself as a tool is fairly secure. It gives a really strong platform for lots of really powerful engagement. Communication to and from Google Drive is encrypted. At the same time, it can be it can be unencrypted. It is certainly possible that it can be hacked. Certainly for the organizations that I'm working with, Google Drive is not an option. And there are a couple of reasons, one of which is users can be pretty rotten at managing access on Google Drive. And so depending on how you set it up, if you've got a bunch of users all setting up documents and sharing it with each other, you have no central access and no central understanding of who has access to what documents, who's copying them. If a device is stolen and has access to that drive, then whoever has stolen that device, this is the link to physical security. And so there are ways to set up a Google shared space that do have central authorization and management. You can do it properly, but in general, my advice is that you need more secure tools than that, especially if you're dealing with very sensitive information. That's a short answer to a really complicated question.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so there were two questions of that. I don't want to muddle them up in the order. What was the second question again?
Just hold on 1 second. So the second question is, what happens if people choose not to give consent? And then from the staff member's point of view, and then from the client or the people who we're serving's point of view. So they choose to opt out.
Okay. So a part of the presentation, I did mention that obviously we have, explained to the employees to say, we already have your information. So that's the first bit. And this was more so from a compliance point of view to say, we're just asking for your signature to say yes, because we already have it. But like I said, we have people who have then said, no, I don't want you to give my ID. I don't want you to give my driver's license. And unfortunately, because they're already in the business, we can't exactly allow for that because it does disrupt the way we process information and what we're using it for. So for example, if a person who's a driver in the company is refusing to give us access to their driver's license, that obviously then doesn't work in the staff member's favor, because then it means you don't want to consent to actually doing your job. In the same manner where if you're saying, I don't want you to have my ID or my banking details, that means we can't pay you. So, obviously everything within reason. So what I've had to do now, which is actually what's happening, we have about 30 employees who've said various no's to certain things, and especially the next of kin. And we work in a place where there's moving machinery. So there are obviously injuries on duty. And if I can't get a hold of whoever you're living with, because you've declined to give me the number, that becomes problematic, from the business standpoint. So the only advice I can give to others is, you need to be able to explain it in the way that they understand that, obviously if you're a current employee, I already have your information. And legally, you cannot exactly say no to this because of what your job entails. And if you have said no to something, it obviously does then affect you negatively as, the staff member. Then in terms of like I said, we have a lot of resellers or customers where we have, hordes and hordes of like list of email addresses where sales representatives do actually have access to that, which does become problematic because it means that I can contact, a number of people that do business with Baron and start my own business on the outside. So that is fraud in a sense. Because they have signed an agreement with the company, which then brings me to the point of breaching the policies, where now it's become a criminal act. Therefore, we can invade your privacy as the sales representative to then put you under an investigation and go through your things like your bank statements and things like that to verify that you actually haven't taken money from people who were originally doing business with Baron, and now you sort of scoop them up and started doing business, with you. So yeah, that becomes more of a criminal thing. And the third question? Dom, you're on mute.
There I'm talking to myself happily. What happens if the organization does not indicate how data will be used, shared, and then destroyed? And maybe part of the question from a staff member's point of view is hypothetically, if a staff member chooses to leave the organization, what happens with destruction of the data? But then broadly speaking, is there an obligation to indicate how information will be used, shared, and destroyed?
Yes, so part of the consent form, because like I said, in hindsight, we should have made it shorter because it is 4 pages. We do explain in a number of paragraphs where we store it and how long we're going to keep it and how it's then going to be destroyed. So, and who actually has access to that information. So like I said, as much as I'm the compliance coordinator, I cannot see any employee files at all. The only thing I can see are the POPI consent forms that I've had to distribute and then obviously verify to say that the 400 employees have actually signed. And then that information becomes the information officer's problem, so to speak, to say that it's up to date. And if we then decide to terminate employees or move around or get temporary employees, that everybody, goes through the same process. So we do have labor brokers that work here. And with that, obviously, we turn around, it's like, at least 5 people every 3 months. So there's a lot of documentation to go through because it's also IDs, it's also driver's licenses and all these other things that they need to, basically comply with, depending on whatever job they provide them to do. So with that, it's very important on our side to communicate to them properly what happens to the information and make sure that whatever has been scanned and has remained on our servers for the the amount of time that is stipulated, that it does actually get destroyed. And like I said, is not sitting in a recycle bin somewhere where normally can go and click, and find, an employee who's been gone for 6 years and find the address and all of that. So access is very limited with regards to that. And we do communicate with that. And like I said, we have a waste management system where we have a third party that comes through and there's only like 2 people in the whole building who can shred those documents. It's a whole lot of documents. If we can't shred, those 2 people need to stand there by that big truck and throw in those documents, and they basically get turned into pulp so that they can't be reconstructed. So that's the long and short of it. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'm going to actually just ask the same questions for Justin and Craig because I think that their experience is also valuable in this regard. So the first is, what happens, how do you deal with it if people choose not to give consent? And what happens if the organization doesn't indicate how data will be used, shared and destroyed? Justin, I'm going to ask you to speak first.
Cool, thanks. I think this, so the first one about with people giving consent from the place where I'm an organization with photography and videography security, that's just a simple answer. If someone says, I do not want my photo to be taken, I do not want it to be shared, we cannot do it. Even if we set up a whole photo shoot and suddenly they're like, no, I don't want to do this, we have to make a plan B. That is a right that we cannot ignore. So that's just a quick answer on that one. The one about data being destroyed and what, can you just repeat it again, Dom?
So what happens if organization doesn't indicate how their data will be used, shared and destroyed?
Oh, okay, so yeah, that was from our earlier discussion of saying that when we give clients collateral that they've signed a consent form to agree with using our collateral that we've taken. So we've had it once or twice within the organization where for example, we've done like a learning course with some of our young entrepreneurs. And then a partner will say like, cool, can we put this up on our site? We get them to consign the consent form because remember our students signed it to say that they are using it just for promotional basis. And we will say to them, cool, please advise of how long it will be. Is it for the campaign period? Because normally they just campaign periods or a specific few days. If they do not comply to that, I often check up with them and I follow up and I say, hi, I still see that, for example, the banner or your PR piece is still up. From an organic point of view, you can't really take things off Google. It's very difficult. But from a paid section, people can hide it and delete it. If they do not, it's never happened before, so I'm glad all of our partners are very understanding. If they don't take it down, that's then when I would escalate it to HR. And if it got even worse, it would become a law matter because they are not agreeing to our security measures of data that we've shared with them. So yeah, those are the 2 answers from our side.
Great. Anything to add from your side, Craig?
Yeah, I think I'll just tackle it a little bit from the beneficiary side. Is when a beneficiary is entering a program and does not consent to all or part of the protection of information provisions. In our situation, that happens quite a lot because people are so suspicious of authorities, so scared of having their information anywhere. And what it does is it limits our access, our ability to give them services. And so what we do then is we have a kind of watered down version of our services that we can offer to people that doesn't require any information from them. We essentially just count them as a head for our reporting purposes, but we have no information. We have no ways of following up to see if they're okay. We have no way of showing that they've made progress. Much of our services are rehabilitation services. And so we try and accommodate that by having an alternative that is something. But people, and then what tends to happen is as people are in the program a little bit more and they grow a little bit of trust with us and they talk to other beneficiaries, then often they realize that actually it can be okay. And then they come on board a bit more.
Great. I think maybe related to that, to your response, Craig, and it was aimed at Justin, but I'm going to ask Justin and Craig to just give a response to this. Is it correct? Is that correct by POPI Act to take pictures of individuals, most vulnerable people? Will say they are forced by the situation to agree to a picture, even if they're not happy about it, just because they really need food, for example, while the organization or donors want proof that the food was given. So I think that may be speaking into the complexity of giving consent to people who want services. So Craig, I'm going to ask you to go first and then Justin second.
Okay. We actually have for this very reason, we have a policy that we never take photographs of our clients. We just don't. And it's a very unpopular policy with our donors, and we have an ongoing argument about it. And so we'll take pictures from behind so that nobody's recognizable and things like that, and find other ways to demonstrate that we are providing the services that we are providing, because there is definitely a real danger of a coercive element here for people who have nothing and have no space to respond. That's a pretty extreme position, but we do pretty extreme work. So, other organizations make different choices.
Thanks. Justin?
Yeah, I'm very in line with Craig. I think we're one of the other organizations that does have a bit of a different stance on it, but it's a two-pronged there. So most of, especially now when you look at like COVID in 2020 and this year when mass food parcels, and Afrika Tikkun was one of the head leads in that, in distributing huge amounts of quantities to not just our beneficiaries, but to the communities at large. When it came to our beneficiaries, remember every year when the children sign up under the age of 18, their parents are signing up and giving consent. And then also, the kids that are over 18 sign up and give consent. So with our beneficiaries, it's not too difficult, because also, you remember, most of the parents and beneficiaries have been with us for many years. They've seen the collateral, the content, and that we are a positive brand, that we don't share anything that is like demeaning to them on our digital and social platforms. So with them, we still always ask though. We, like they're going to see a camera and we're like, are you fine with this? We normally, on days when we do distribution parcels, because they have to sign, to say like, I haven't been in contact with anyone, we put a clause in there saying, oh, do you consent to photographs being taken of you with food parcels? A lot of them are happy. Some say no, we don't take it then. And if that image is taken, I blur out the face, or what I do is I use what Craig does, is we try and find images of them from behind, or just their hands picking up a food parcel. From an external point of view, that was where we were just slightly different. Like I know last year we did a mass distribution in Alexander of I think it was 30 food trucks. That's the same when it comes to news and media. This wasn't to show our donors what we were doing. It was just in terms of giving a collateral basis to the country of what is the actual situation. So I remember just sitting on a food truck
it was a little bit terrifying. We have like 5,000 or 6,000 people like literally like running towards a truck that's food. That's the larger community, and we weren't taking that to show the donors like, look what we're doing, or to even to the public to say, look what we're doing. It was more for just a general information of saying that COVID is really actually impacting our lower community. And it was really just to show the emphasis of how private, NGO, and government actually really needs to. So that's where we came up with a partnership with private government and NGO sector. We were like, we need to have a collaboration. So that was the hard part. I know there's a second question that will answer to that as well. So I'm very much in line with Craig, but we are very strict in terms of if people just say no, and if I find out they've said no, then I just blur it out or I just don't use the image.
Thanks. Justin, there are a few questions directly towards you. So one is, Justin, just to clarify on the images of children, we often take pics or actions, rallies, and other mass groupings of people. Should we omit children from these images, given that it's impossible to get consent of people in such settings? That's one question. The second is not on the chat, but it says Afrika Tikkun has relationships with social media influencers. How do we deal with people who want pictures of influencers, so the children basically wanting to be part of those pictures? And how do you deal with the fact that children love selfies, so are often wanting to be in pictures?
Okay, I'll also let Craig jump in. I think the one with the crowd, he can jump in maybe just from his perspective. And then obviously, yes, the selfie and influencer sector of kids wanting to be in, I'll definitely think his inputs and even Nomple's input from a POPI. So the first one was the crowds. There's two ways you can do it. Normally when you have an event or social rally, from a digital perspective, we send out a communication, a comms, from WhatsApp to email to SMS, where it's like, when you go to a Joburg Day or anything like that, where it's within the T's and C's, you're actually saying that, because Joburg Day, they take photographs, 947's team, you're going to be a random person. And if you're consenting to them taking photographs to expose or to give exposure to the event. So that's a good way, if you're having a rally or an event, is to get people to sign a consent form. And normally, even over email, you can see that if someone has read the email, so you get that action that, you sent it to them, it had the T's and C's or the consent form and they've read it. If they don't know, click it, it's very tricky in that situation. I would, to admit, for me personally, when it comes to kids under the age of 18, I would really just blur out, I would either exclude them or I'd blur out their faces. It's a very sensitive subject, like I'm sure a parent would not be happy if they went onto a site and suddenly they see a photo of their 5-year-old daughter, in a rally or something or in a crowd. So I would, you can always do that to get their consent, but from a child protection policy, because we have issues not just of hackers and that, there's predators, there's extortion, there's all of that. So I'll just completely take that out or blur them out, blur their faces out, because that is a safety act. So Craig can follow on that one if you would like.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for sort of mass events where you don't even speak to perhaps the people who are coming to a food truck and stuff, those are actually public events, and as far as I understand, don't fall under POPI at all. And it is in fact legal to take photographs of people in public places and publish them. Journalists do it all the time. I think we should hold ourselves to a higher standard and be very careful and respectful about how we do that. And I really agree, putting children's faces into mainstream and social media is just not a good idea, especially with the level of crimes against children that we have in this country and in the world in general. For events where we have more control, one of the things we do is when we're signing people into, it could be a conference with 300 people or something, and everyone's going to be, lots of people are going to be taking pictures for their Twitter feeds or whatever it is. We actually, on their name badges, we ask people to put a sticker that says whether they agree to having photographs taken of them or not. Some of you may have been to conferences where this is asked of you. And so you could put a little red sticker next to your name on your chest, and then people know that you would rather not be in any photographs, or you could put a green one that says feel free. And what we then do is we kind of watch the hashtags that are associated with that meeting and stuff, and we try and catch anything that's violating that, and we'll talk to the people who are doing it. So it's sort of a middle ground of you're actually giving people a choice, and you're letting them express that choice in a way that's really easy. But it still depends upon the trust and the relationships of the people to respect each other in that way. And we've done that kind of stuff.
Fantastic, thank you. Lawful, do you have anything to add on that?
Yes, I do, but it's more of a sort of a personal thing. So with myself, I have a daughter who's in preschool. And at the beginning of the year, the principal sent out sort of a, would you mind if when she's taking pictures of the children doing activities, to post on their social media pages? Because obviously they're trying to advertise, and I declined for the reasons that Craig and Justin have said, because obviously I don't want my daughter's picture, being saved by random people. But in the same breath, because we have a group with other parents, she would take then pictures, but then send all those pictures to the group instead of sending it to me individually, which then obviously defeats the purpose of that, because as much as you haven't sent it on social media, you've sent it to 40 other parents that I don't know, and I found myself also obviously receiving pictures of children that I don't know, that who haven't consented to that. So just for the other participants as well, is if you've experienced something like that, it should be something that you raise within your WhatsApp groups, because we also have WhatsApp groups here at work. And there's something I'm also trying to control where, information doesn't get lost, where people are taking things that they shouldn't be taking, like people's phone numbers, where if I've declined my number and now all of a sudden, because you see my name, you try and create, sort of a different chat with me on the side. So it's the same thing with pictures. We also had a COVID drive here at work where we wanted to obviously advertise on our website that our employees were getting vaccinated. We had to ask, it's people over 18, and most of them said no. So we ended up having like 5 pictures out of 400, employees, which obviously is not a good, turnout, but you have to have that conversation, with people, because not everybody wants to be on social media pages where they're not aware of. Yeah, so that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. And again, like very nicely personalized.
Dom, what was the second part to your question? So it's sometimes
So I think
hard
that
to follow.
Possibly, sure. Possibly related is how do you deal with social media influencers and children wanting to take photos with those people, and the fact that children love selfies.
Cool. So yeah, that's one. So a lot of our kids as well, they always do like the peace sign, the reverse peace sign, or rocker sign. Often when they do those and I'm taking photographs, or even the marketing coordinators or marketing champions, we immediately we'll look up and be like, sorry guys, we need to retake that photo. It's just because it's a fun thing, but it's just something that even certain things like that could have a negative view from our external audience. So with regards to the influencers, they all sign forms or consent forms with us. We make them sign contracts to state that at any public event that they are associated with us, that the photographs that they take, they have to go to an MC, myself, or the events manager to show the photograph that they've taken to get approval first. The kids obviously at any of those events also, so we don't just do where you sign a consent form like once a year. At every event as well, you have to re-sign consent forms. So they are very aware. And also the MCs, we vet our MC or our influencers extremely from Lala, I don't know all their names. I wish Nuktulu was in here, but we vet them extremely well in terms of that they are in line with our brand values. They are in line with what we want to achieve and what impact and message we want to go out there. And we've never had an issue with them. With the kids wanting to take photos as well, like, you know, because obviously they're famous. We in a way, and we allow it because the kids are just wanting that moment, and then often you'll see the influencer will actually just delete the photos. Just because they will only want one or two specific images, but they know that they can't just share images of the kids because that is within our, because we also always debrief them or brief them and debrief them after the event. And then with the kids taking selfies at a center level, because like you said now, most of them have smartphones. That's always a tricky situation. You know, if they tag or if they share on our platforms, we can track that. We don't within, like, it's like the same at schools. We kind of ban phone usage at the centers. We also make our kids aware of not taking selfies, because, you know, you could have, for example, a girl in a bathroom taking a photo with her friend. That's very inappropriate. So it is a hard thing to manage, but we do try and do trainings with the teachers, with the managers, to also, especially for the kids that are at an older age, but still under the age of 18, to just inform them. But this is where I go back to where Craig said it's organizations need to take a very strong responsibility, but it's also individuals need to take the responsibility of what they share and what they allow. And even going back to Nomclaire with the images of those kids being shared on the WhatsApp group, you need to raise those things. You need to make it aware to people, like, hey guys, like I'm getting images of your kids and you're getting images of mine. I feel this is not right. You need to raise those, and we need to teach our kids and our young people and even our staff all of those things, because we need to say to them that it's so easy just to really make someone upset or to breach it. You never know that on a group, you know, for example, hypothetically, you share the group of photos for the school, and then this one parent shares it with her family. You never know with that family. There could also be someone that now shares it with one of his mates, like, oh, this is my niece. You never know if that person could be a predator. He uses now for extortion. It's terrifying, and it's very hard to manage. So everyone actually also just needs to look inwards and say, like, if I'm taking this image, is it appropriately right? Is it emotionally right? Is it acceptable? So that's what we just constantly try to do trainings around those as well. So that's my points there.
And I think that speaks into the comment on the chat, which says, this is very disturbing. I sent my child to creche on her first day. Later after work, I checked social posts and I see my child posted on Facebook saying Buntle first day with lots of comments. Some even asking, is that Buntle, and gives their surname. The creche responding yes. And I think that, as you're saying, Justin, that talks to the fact that we as parents or as people working with vulnerable or populations, including children, we have a responsibility to go back to those schools or to those posts and say, I'm not okay with this, and, you know, request these things to be taken down. I'm aware of time. There are a couple more questions. So I'm just going to, the first is there always a 5-year timeline on storage of data, or is that only for employers? And is destroying data literally deleting it? Nomclaire and possibly Craig, if you could respond to those.
Okay, so with my understanding in my industry, yes, it is, I can only speak from my experience, that it is for employers the 5 years, but it does become longer depending on what type of information you're storing. So I'll give you an example. I've worked a lot in manufacturing, and obviously there are people that have injuries. And with that, you are required to store that information for as long as the company is alive, so to speak. So because somebody who can get injured, you know, on the job when they're in the company for 3 years might then leave the job, but somewhere along the line, that injury could lead to other things, you know, going wrong in their body where it was just the beginning. So you need to be able to, you know, track And obviously for the company's well-being as well, to say, no, you know, this person had these medical records and, you know, when they left the company, this was the status of this person. Should that person want to come back and claim to say, you know, this injury then led me to develop cancer, you know, for example. So it is 5 years, but like I said, if it's got to do with health and safety, it is basically for as long as the company is in existence. And by deleting, yes, we mean it must be removed. Like I said, it should not be a case where, and Craig will jump in here, where if I've said that Dom has not worked at Barron for 5 years and on the 6th year we're deleting, that I should not be able to find anything of Dom's on the company's service anyway. That's basically it. So you can jump in, Craig, there.
Yeah, exactly right. Health information is a little bit different. So in South Africa, health information should be kept for 6 years after a patient becomes dormant. So as soon as you've got to a point at which that patient is no longer receiving any services, the clock starts. And after 6 years, that information should be destroyed. And that means that physical records are shredded and that any electronic information is deleted. And that varies in different countries. My headquarters happens to be in Minnesota in the United States. There it's 7 years. So it's on the organization to know what the law is in the areas that they're operating and for the kind of information that they are dealing with.
Which speaks to the comment from Ofaro, who says that for NU, for Nokwazi, our auditors require us to have data for 7 years. So, which speaks to what is the responsibility of the organization and within the sector. I am aware of time. I'd like to thank everybody who has participated. I think that this has been a really useful, interesting, sometimes a little bit disturbing and anxiety-provoking webinar, but really, really useful. Thank you to the speakers, to Craig, Justin, and Umhle. I think that your expertise has really been invaluable and given us a lot to think about. To the audience and people who've joined, a very, very big thank you. And to the Afrika Tikkun team who are behind the scenes and helping to set this up. To the marketing team, and would like to say a very particular thank you. And we hope to do this again sometime soon. So yes, and I see that there's a request to share presentations. Oh, Justin, I did also get one request behind the scenes, whether there was a possibility to share the policy that you were working on in your presentation. So possibly as part of the sharing, to share the policy and or the link to the policy. But we will share, and thank you everybody, and take care of yourselves. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. Dom, just on your thing, so any presentation that it wants to be shared, or the audience that would like to have a presentation shared, that also needs to be confirmed and accepted by the presenters. So
Perfect. Agreed.
cheers, guys.
Thanks everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.